Okay, I feel we should get started. So the agenda for today revolves around these five things mainly. We'll look at how the ASP.NET Core MVC application is created. In the last session, we saw ASP.NET page-based application, right? So because page-based applications are pretty rare these days, most of the time we follow some pattern or the other, and the most important pattern, most highly used pattern is MVC. So we'll throw more weightage behind it and see how it is implemented on .NET Core, which includes setting up the request pipelines with middlewares, the existing middlewares provided out of the box. In the process, we are also going to see how to create our own middleware and integrate it within the middleware pipeline or request pipeline. Then we'll move on to understand the object relational mapping, the entity framework core, and then we'll see how to use these features to provide the data driven behavior to our application by making the data driven controllers with the help of EF core. Okay. So I hope uh, before we actually start, everyone is aware of the MVC framework, at least conceptually.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe .NET, maybe some non-.NET environment you might have worked with, but if you're aware of MVC framework or MVC architecture, it is going to be really, really helpful over here as we can focus more on the .NET core part of it rather than focusing on the MVC architecture itself, right? So let's move on. Our first task is to basically get ASP.NET Core MVC application created. So let's open Visual Studio. Let's create a new project. It remembers what we selected last time, C Sharp, all platforms web. And for MVC, we have a template titled as ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller, right? Let's select this, click Next. Let's name this as ASP.NET Core underscore demo MVC app. Next, .NET 5 is the platform we'll be choosing for now. This is pretty much similar to how we created the page-based application. So again, the authentication type being asked over here, what type of authentication you want, whether it is going to be no authentication or the database driven user store where we go for individual accounts. There will be forms created, I mean views created. There will be authentication controller created. Then Windows integrated authentication, which doesn't actually add anything to the project, just sets up Windows authentication. So automatically it sees if the currently logged in user to the machine is having the right credentials, which can be validated against the right source or authentication provider or not. I mean, the server is correct one or not. It is authenticated, authorized by the configured server or not, right? And then we have Microsoft Identity Platform, which combines the capability of these two, along with the additional facility where we can actually get our authentication requirements fulfilled with the help of the Azure Active Directory or any other user store third-party service available on any other cloud platform as well. So for now, we'll be going ahead with none. Configure for HTTPS is good idea because these days, as we discussed in the last session also, most of the applications run on the secure HTTP channel only. Let's say create. And pretty quickly the project should be created. Let's have a look at the project structure. We have dependencies, frameworks. This is just like the page-based application we created in last session. Properties having launch settings, which contains configuration for IIS as host, configuration for IIS Express is also there. And then what if your application is running in its own process? So you have the configuration for that as well. So this is also like what we saw in the previous session. www root folder again containing all the static stuff that includes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And this is actually handled by your one of the middleware provided out of the box called as static files. If that middleware is not added, the content of this folder will not be delivered. Then we have controllers, that is the MVC portion of it. This is new. There we had pages. Here we have MV and C folders, model view and controller folders. So all the logic, the front end logic goes in the controllers. The data structures go in models and the UI portion goes in views. We don't have the code behind file as such over here. Like for page based application, we saw there was a .cs html.cs file behind the page. Here we don't have anything like that. This doesn't have any linked file. The work of that code file is actually taken care of by controllers over here in MVC. And then the usual app settings thing, which is having the same configuration by default, which we had in page-based application. Program.cs looks pretty much the same. Startup.cs also looks pretty much the same with just one difference. Here we have something called as use endpoints and where some route template has been used. This wasn't the case with page-based application, right? Because page-based applications are like where the page instance is directly created. And the uh, page has got a life cycle of its own. So there is a sequence of methods which are automatically called. Whereas when it comes to the model view controller framework, it's not like that. There is a controller class, there are actions within the controller class, and the request needs to contain some information about which controller, which action you are looking to invoke. Correct? And that's where this route template basically helps in. The method, the action method may have some parameters. So parameter information also goes in the route template. Correct. This is not a new thing. Earlier with ASP.NET framework, on .NET framework, we used to have routeconfig.cs file, which used to have the configuration for endpoints. Now the same thing has been moved to startup.cs in .NET Core. Okay. Ultimately, the work being done is the same as what we had earlier. Now we can see there is some sample controller already created by the name home, which has got action called as index, which has got action called as privacy, which has got an action called as error, all returning some I action result. And technically, if you see, they are actually returning view result object, which is implementing I action result directly or indirectly. Okay.
Saket,
So yeah,
hello. One
yeah,
question.
yeah,
For the startup.cs file, so there
yeah.
we can provide the first page, means which page first to navigate, like
It
the index and
uh,
home controller name over there, right? I can see.
correct, correct. Just one simple correction over there. We don't call it as page, rather we call it as controller and action.
You're
So
right.
here, if you see, here there is a default value provided to controller and default value provided to action. Means if the URL doesn't contain the name of the controller and the name of the action within it, by default, which controller and which action should be invoked.
Correct. I mean, this should is totally similar with the normal MVC. Means there were
Absolutely,
so
absolutely. Templates are not changed. It is just where the configuration goes has changed.
true,
Got it,
true. Yes.
Vivekanand?
Yes, yes, got it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we have index, we have privacy, we have error. So if index is requested, the view for index will be returned. If privacy is requested, view for privacy is returned. If error is requested, view for error is returned with some error view model object. And here, if you see, the corresponding views are there in home, index and privacy. Now error belongs to the home controller only, but we don't have error view because this will not be specific to any controller. This will be application level action. Hence, this view has been placed under shared. So even this structure also, if you see, is quite similar to that of regular MVC. Correct? Same layout.cshtml is there under shared, and any other fragment component. If you have fragment views, you have those are also here. Partial views, we call it precisely. All are present in shared. Yes. Okay, so let's see what by default we get over here. Now, when we run the application for the first time, it is actually only the base path, base URL, which has been hit. There is no route which contains the name of the controller and the name of the action. In that case, the default values configured in route template come into picture. Nothing specified. So by default, the action should be index and the controller should be home. That's what we have configured for, right? But if we actually put something like this, it will go and hit this controller and this action. And the controller keyword is never added over here because that is added at the framework level behind the scenes, so that the instance of the right controller class can be created. Got my point?
Yes.
Because the MVC framework works mainly on the basis of conventions rather than syntaxes or rather than any specific patterns. Convention-based programming actually makes your programming little more easier. Just follow the conventions and you are good to go. Right? The efforts are automatically reduced if you are following the conventions. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's get this closed. Here, let's understand the request pipeline configuration. So let's first of all go to startup.cs. This we have already discussed what they are. Here, let's put focus on configure. Even this also we discussed. If environment is development, then the yellow page of death has to be displayed. If we are in production or any other environment other than development, then the yellow page of death should not be displayed. Rather, some user-friendly error page should be displayed, right? Correct? The developers exception page is for developers, not for the end users or testers, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if I don't have this, in whatever case, whichever environment I am running my application in, the error page will not be displayed, neither the developer exception page nor the user-friendly exception page. It will always be a system generated error page that will be displayed, most likely internal server error, 500 series status code, right? Let's see what
Yes.
happens now with this. Suppose here I have on privacy, I'll do that. Throw, just simulating an exception situation. New application exception error. This is my message. Okay. And I run it in non-debug mode with this hollow triangle. Start without debugging. All well here. I click on privacy. This is what I get. What is this screen called as? This is what yellow screen of death is. And here I can see the internal details of my project setup. Which code file has got the issue? Which line of code has got the issue? Many a times, the code before the statement where the exception was raised, or code after the line where the exception was raised are also displayed. Plus, you get the stack trace as well. So if I go to show raw exception details, probably I see even more details, right? Complete stack trace is there. Don't you think this is not good for the code security? If I have some hard coded secret into my code, that hard coded secret might get revealed. Yes or no?
Yes.
So it's dangerous, right? Hence, this is okay if I'm running in development mode. What if I'm running in any other mode other than development? So I just go to launch settings and do a small change. Let's say I call this as staging. I'm running on IIS Express, right? So only changing this is good. Save and run without debugging again. I click on privacy. What I'm getting? Is it the yellow screen of death or is it user-friendly error page? User-friendly one, right?
Yes.
No code details are there, right?
Yes, right.
Now this is good. This is fine. Let's go back to development environment, save. And then what I do here is I comment this section. No middleware I add for handling errors. And I just run without debugging again. See, HTTP error 500, internal server error. Correct? So this is in development environment. Let's see what happens if I change the mode to staging. I go to privacy, still the same. Is this good or bad? What do you think?
It's bad.
It's bad. There has to be some information displayed so that developer also understands what's the issue. And probably the users are also informed that, okay, there is some issue and we need to contact administrator, right? If there is unknown error, how do we actually know that what happened? Like, I give you an example. You go to ATM, you try to withdraw some money, let's say 5,000 from your account. There is no error message displayed on the screen. There is no money coming out. Don't you think you would be worrying up over there?
Yes, right.
Because you don't have a clear picture what happened. You will always be in a dilemma whether my account got debited or not. SMSs are there, but sometimes the SMS is also received after some delay if network is not good, right?
Yes.
If immediate SMS is received, we probably would be fine. But again, that SMS has to come. When I'm saying that there is no handler for the exception, probably SMS won't come as well. So that will be problematic, right? Yes or no?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
why, don't you think the middleware is important over here for error handling based on the environment? Developers need more intrinsic details, whereas others need only the user-friendly message that, okay, something went wrong. And the developer team is working on it, right?
Yes.
Correct. So I hope everyone understands this. What is the benefit of this middleware? Two middlewares we can see over there. One is developer exception page and one is exception handler, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about this middleware HTTPS redirection. I'll go back to launch settings once again. First of all, I've set this up back to development environment. My application on HTTP channel is available on this port number. So I just copy this URL and run it again. And paste that URL over here. What happened? 44355, whereas I'm asking for 59287. What is happening? I'm not getting any error, but I mean, my application is visible, but it's not on the port I requested for. Also, this log says that this is SSL secured, right? It's not on HTTP. I'm requesting HTTP though. We can try in a different tab also altogether. I'm asking for HTTP localhost 59287. What happening here? This also
Yes.
goes to secure channel, right? Why? Because of this middleware setting that we have done. Use HTTPS redirection. So we have used the middleware HTTPS redirection. I comment this out. Save, start again. By default, it's running here. That's fine. But what if I uh, request the HTTP channel based application explicitly on the given port? It just stays there. This is on non-secure port, right? Now, if it is
Yes.
working in this tab, definitely if I open another tab and request it, it will be opening in non-HTTP channel only, right? It's not by default redirecting. It looks like that my application is now available on two different ports. Yes or no? One is secure, one is non-secure. That is good, but I want the non-secure request should automatically be transferred to the secure channel request. Yes or no?
Yes.
And that should be done automatically instead of me writing some URL rewrite and all those stuff. I just need to add this middleware. So before the request is handled, it is first of all put into the secure channel request. And there onwards, it interacts with the user on secure channel only. Make sense?
Yes. Right.
Now, when I'm running this application, you can see some nice formatted layout, right? Clean layout. This is because the entire UI is actually configured with a theming framework called as Bootstrap, and that has been added here. There is site.css, which is site-specific CSS, which has been built on the top of Bootstrap, where Bootstrap is present in this lib folder Bootstrap dist CSS. Correct? Then there is some JavaScript also, common JavaScript. Along with Bootstrap, we have jQuery and jQuery validation also for our help in case if we are working with forms. Right now, we are not, but in future, if we do work, this can be leveraged. Yes. Though there is no compulsion to use this, but yeah, if required, you can use it. Yes or no?
Yes.
The
Yes.
proof of Bootstrap framework being used is visible here in layout.cshtml as well. Do you see? The linking to Bootstrap, then to the site.css. Do you see that?
Yes.
The JS for that is being loaded here. jQuery also being loaded over here. And any application specific JavaScript which you might have written in site.js is also being loaded here. Any other additional script which is required, probably you can create a section in that view and then you can get it rendered after these three scripts. Yes. Now see, what I do is I go back to startup.cs and comment use static files. Start. Do you see any change in the output?
Yes.
And what's that?
CSS
There is no CSS, there is no theming, right? If I say view source, here also I can see the style sheet is being requested, but it's not available, right? It's not being served. Site.cs is also not available. Anything which is there in www root folder is not going to be served. JavaScript is also not there, jQuery, Bootstrap, JavaScript. None of the static files are visible. Got my point? This content is coming from your view, not the static HTML. This is static HTML and view. Now view engine is working. So the HTML from the view engine is getting processed and getting returned back. But instead, if I would have created a static HTML page, it would not have been available. Even the images or audio video files which you might want to be served from your application and which are static files which you might be keeping in www root, maybe assets folder, that also would not get served. Understand? To get the contents of this www root folder served, I need the middleware static files added. But one more question, is it going to be always required? There could be some application which has got each and every UI feature configured dynamically. The code is being generated dynamically. In such application, I may not require static files. So why to lengthen the pipeline, request pipeline? Why not short circuit it? Yes or no?
Yes.
Right, back to the COVID days, many of the organizations which were still working, maybe some critical organizations which had to work, created the sanitizing tunnels also, right? People were required to go through that tunnel to get sanitized before entering the premises. Automatic sprays were there, right? Maybe at the main gate or maybe at the entry of your floor, wherever. Even vehicles were required to be sanitized, right?
Yes.
Okay, but is that the case applicable today also?
No.
Situation has improved much. COVID is pretty much under control, right? And because people have been vaccinated as well, probably the threat is not as big as what it was there in year 2021 and partially 22 also, right? So requirements have changed. Now going through that tunnel was mandatory, so it used to take more time to get in. Now that tunnel has been removed. We can get in pretty quickly. Yes or no? That 3 meter distance rule is also abolished. It's no more mandatory. So we can get in pretty quickly. Otherwise, the queues were becoming very large because of that distance that was supposed to be maintained, social distancing, right? So that's what the same concept is applicable here. You can keep your request pipeline as short as possible by adding only those middlewares which you want or which you need to use within your application. All other middlewares you can keep away that are not required. Make sense? If I disable this routing middleware, what would happen? Simply the request itself will not reach the right controller, correct? Use endpoints is depending on the routing. It has a dependency on routing. So if routing is not there, the endpoints also will not work. Now, if endpoint is also commented, probably there is nothing which will work. I mean, there may not be any error as such, but it just says this URL is not found because there is no handler for it. The handler was there configured somewhere here. Correct? Even if I say, okay, let's put correct. So I do need endpoints middleware to process the request, and to enable that endpoint, I need routing middleware also, which sets up the routes, which allows the virtual request to be created. Now, where the request will be handled is decided by endpoint. Receiving request is mandatory for that, and which is done by routing. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. What is use authorization? Right now, it's not having any impact as such, but tomorrow, if I just enable some sort of authentication, with authentication, I might want that some role-based accessibility should be set up. In that case, the authorization middleware will be required. So if it is not being used and it is not making any impact, I can keep it disabled as well. There will be no difference over here. This will just work as usual. Now this is failing because we actually made it fail. Yes, that's an expected behavior. Maybe what we can do is we can go back to home controller and let's comment this line so that we don't have any error. Yeah, I hope you understand what middleware component actually is. Middleware is just adding some additional logic, additional piece of code to your response request and response both rather, right? Your response travels back the same pipeline in reverse direction. Understand?
Yes.
And your endpoint middleware is actually a terminal middleware. Means after which, if you configure any middleware component, it won't get processed. Because from there, the request returns as a response. Understand?
Yes.
Okay. Now time for looking at a custom middleware component. How do I create custom middleware? Before that, we also need to understand why I would need a custom middleware. Let's say you have a simple requirement that each request which comes in should be logged. I mean, the record should be maintained. Which user requested the resource, at what time, what day, which resource was requested, and whether the response was successful or not. All this information needs to be recorded somewhere for the upkeep of your application. I mean, this will help in making your application run smoothly, healthy, right? Understand? Do we have any built-in
Yes.
functionality for this? No. We might have lots of loggers available, But to make the logging possible for each request, we probably need to add some code. If I add that in controllers in actions, there will be redundant code. I'm looking for every single request. I might have thousands of actions. Redundancy at that level will be too high, and lot of chances of erroneous logging in that case will be there. Correct? Why not centralize it? Every request is going through the pipeline. So why not put this configuration for logging within the pipeline itself? So every request will get logged automatically. Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, for our example that we are going to see with implementation, what I'm looking for is whenever the response goes, the response must carry a custom header, response header along with it. You know, each response actually carries some headers, right? If I run this and go to the development tools by pressing function key F12, somewhere you can see the response headers as well. Precisely the tools like Fiddler and uh, Postman show that. Let's see if it is getting displayed here.
No, go to the network.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It is more of
refresh this.
yeah.
Yeah, you can see the request.
Response header I'm looking for. So
No, click on the request.
specific request, you mean? Yeah, here it is. So I selected this localhost. This is what was requested. This is mainly browser specific, right? Different browsers have different consoles for this. Usually I work with Firefox, so it's different over there. No worries. Finally, we got it. Here we have the response header section, and there are some response headers which are getting generated by the system. I might have a requirement where I want to override some of these. I might have a requirement to add an additional header of my own for every request. Whenever response is generated, I want this to work. So the right place is to do with the middleware, right? So that it is processed within the pipeline itself. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's create one. Maybe we can close all the non-required files, home controller, app settings. Startup.cs I'll need, so I'll keep this open. And here I add one more folder to my project. I name this as middlewares. And then right click on middlewares folder, add a new class. I'll name this as custom response header middleware. Add. I'll need some namespaces to be imported here. So the first one is system.threading.task, which provides me some asynchronous APIs to work with. Next, I'll go for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.HTTP to allow me to work with headers and even the HTTP request and responses. Then I go for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Builder, which provides me the support for some application builder stuff, which is something that you see in your program.cs file. right? Because I'm looking to do something at the application level. Request pipeline is at the application level. So that's where I'm going to need some APIs from here. Got it? Next. Here I say I have a private read-only member for this class of type request delegate. I name this as underscore next. Okay. Delegates, you must be aware of from the .NET basics, right? They contain the reference of some other function. Compatible function, I mean. Here I say there is a constructor for the class that takes it a single parameter for dependency resolution of type request delegate by the name next and assigns next to underscore next. Purpose of this is basically to provide the chaining with the next middleware component, because after this middleware, I might have another middleware to be added. So somewhere from my middleware, I should be giving the call to another middleware. And that is done with the help of the request delegate. Understand? If my middleware component is a terminal middleware component, probably in that case, I will have next as null. So maybe I don't need request delegate in that case. But if it is going to sit somewhere in between the request pipeline, then I need to have this. Understood?
Yes.
Next, I have an asynchronous method called as invoke async. It should return me the instance of task to keep track of whether it is completed or not. I say invoke async is the name that takes an HTTP context object. This is provided by the HTTP namespace. Let's say the name is context. And there I say access the context object, which carries your request and response objects both. Here I say dot response, dot headers. This is outgoing headers. Response dot headers is outgoing. Request dot headers is incoming list of headers. Got my point?
Yes.
Dot add. I wanted to add a response header, right? Let's say I name this as X underscore or X hyphen custom hyphen header. I'm using the typical header format over here for the name. And here I say hello from custom middleware. And then without fail, I have to say, I mean, once I'm done with the entire code, which is going to be processed by the middleware, at the end, I must have a call to next and pass on the context to it so that the next middleware gets invoked. Okay. And then here I create another class, which is going to be static. Basically, I'm going to create an extension method which allows me to add this middleware to request pipeline. Custom response header middleware extensions. Got it? What it has got is a public static method. Extension methods are always public static, right? that returns me an instance of I application builder. Here I have the method name as use custom response header middleware. That takes in this I application builder app as input. This basically attaches the method to I application builder, right? Extension methods you can read further for more information. Here I say return app dot use middleware custom response header middleware. If I don't put this method in place, this use middleware method is what I'll be required to directly call here. But if you see, none of the out of the box provided middlewares have been configured with use middleware method, correct? They have their own names. Use developer exception page, use exception handler, use HTTPS redirection, and so on. So why not my custom middleware have the same thing? Its own name. That is why I created this extension method. So instead of calling use middleware, I can now call use custom response header middleware. Understand?
Yes.
Okay. Then let's go to startup.cs. Let's import the namespace for middleware, which will be project name dot middlewares. Okay. And then let's go to configure method where middlewares are configured or pipeline is created. Here I say app dot. Apart from exception handling, any other middleware also getting processed might be having some short circuited logic which just doesn't allow the request to go further and return from that middleware component itself. That's why I want the response header to be added before all other middlewares. Because as we discussed the other day, the middlewares are executed in the sequence they are added. Understand?
Yes.
Here I say app.use custom response header middleware. Nothing else needs to be done. Save and start. Same thing we'll do. We'll go to the developer tools console, network, refresh the page. Let's go to localhost, headers, response headers. If you look at now must have the custom header also within it somewhere. It should have been there. X dash custom response header middleware. It's not getting displayed. Okay, I'm looking at request, I guess. Here it should get displayed. Okay. Is it not compiled or something?
Sankit,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not.
Chrome has got the issue of caching also at times. So might be the case that it's not actually retrieving the page from the server.
refresh it once.
Should be added. Wrong. Just wait for a minute.
Sagar, you have
Maybe
added for the request pipeline header, not the response
Oh
header.
yeah, it has to be response, correct.
Yeah.
That's a typo. Yep. So let's go to developer console, refresh, localhost, and here we have, right? Okay, so now this is just one example like how to create the custom middleware and how to execute it or how to configure it. The use is not limited to only this, it can be anything, right? There can be use cases like one we discussed for, say, logging. There can be a custom authentication process that you might want to execute rather than using the built-in authentication middleware which is available. There can be some pre-processing for the request as well that can be added with custom middleware, right? Maybe data needs to be transformed, data needs to be formatted to another format or something. So that all you can do with the help of this middleware concept, custom middleware. Yes or no?
Yes.
yes.
So I hope this is clear. Okay, so time for the break. We'll resume the session at 11, and there we will start with object relational mapping followed by entity framework core and its implementation. Okay.
Okay.
Guys, welcome back. Shall we resume?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about object relational mapping. Okay. So anybody knows what object relational mapping actually is all about? Also termed as ORM, right? What it is?
We map the domain model to the database model so that
Yeah,
we
and
can.
the most popularly used database models that we have been working with since last 40, 50 years is relational model, right? We have relations where the data redundancy is reduced up to greatest extent, and there is a relation that actually manages the link between the two different entities. So we have tables, and then we have relationships where some common column is there, a basic part of the relational database. So that is one world in itself. Yes or no?
Yes.
Whereas on the programming side, since last 30 to 40 years, we have been focusing mainly on object-based and object-oriented programming languages, correct? So we
Yes.
represent all the data related. Am I right? Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, why actually we work with objects or domain objects or models? Here, probably we need to drill down a bit more into the concept of object-oriented programming. What is object-oriented programming? Why object-oriented programming? That again gives rise to the question, what are objects and why objects, right? Objects are something that represents the real world entities that have state, identity, behavior, responsibility associated with each of them, right? And then why object-oriented programming was introduced, which worked heavily with objects or using objects, because objects being real world entities were easy to understand even by the layman. With the agile practices coming in, there are many non-technical people also who work in the project team, and they don't understand the technical terms like what we have in databases. They may not understand table, records, and something like that, fields, right? But if we talk in a layman language, which is usually the focus of objects and object oriented programming, it becomes easy for them also to understand. Correct? Object-oriented programming gives an easy terminology, layman's terminology, which can be understood both by technical people in the team and non-technical layman people in the team. Yes, it bridges the gap because technical team might be very good in technical things, but may not have the domain understanding all the time. Domain understanding is there with people who actually work in that specific domain. So a banker knows the banking systems well than a team which makes software for bank. Am I right? That's why we do have domain experts also in the team. Correct? So with object-oriented programming, the dialogue between technical and non-technical people can be established pretty easily. Yes?
Yes.
And that's where object becomes a central entity. Now, the point is objects are good in all aspects, but they actually cannot store data persistently or permanently. Am I right? They're always in memory stuff. Yes or no?
Yes,
For
right.
data storage, probably you need a backend like database to help you with storing data persistently. Now the challenge is how the object can be understood by database or vice versa. Like database, how it can understand objects and how objects can understand database. Both questions will be there. That is probably where we require some assistance that provides the mapping between the two different worlds, objects and relations or relational data. This bridge probably can be created by us explicitly, which we used to do for long. But then over the years, people realize that, okay, we are doing redundant work. Why not make a framework of it? Why not have some pattern created on it? That's where ORM got introduced, right? Object relational mapping. It is a framework or pattern which actually bridges the two different worlds with each other. Objects and relations can talk to each other, can be transformed into each other as per the requirement. Simply, this concept allows developers to work with data in their applications using the object-oriented concepts while transparently handling the storage and retrieval of that data from a relational database. Make sense? People who are working on objects need not know what is happening in the database, and people who are taking care of the databases need not know what is happening in the application, right? Some encapsulation provided. So we know in a typical traditional setup, data was being stored in relational databases using tables, rows, columns, etc. And as we discussed in object-oriented programming, data is organized in the form of classes and objects that have methods, properties, events, etc. And ORM then provides a layer between the relational world and the objects or object-oriented world. So what all tasks that ORM actually provides? Task number one, of course, is mapping. Or precisely, I can say mapping entities. Right? Where in ORM, each and every class or what we can also call as entity in your application typically corresponds to a table in the database, and the instance of the class corresponds to the rows in that specific table. The class properties or attributes map to the columns of the tables. So there is a mapping language that has to exist, and that is provided by ORM as the first thing. Next, the mapping itself. So I can say ORM, object relational mapping, which actually talks about the different tools that include the mapping language, which provide these mappings. Then all the database operations comes next. Basically, I'm precisely talking about the CRUD operations. They are encapsulated over here, where you actually, as a developer, don't need to write the queries at all, which actually make it completely transparent from database. Doesn't matter what type of database being used behind scenes. It just creates the queries according to which database is being used. Right? That doesn't mean all ORM do that, but this is a standard requirement. Okay, there can be some ORM specifically written for a typical kind of a database, right? It may not be a generic one. Next is transparent data conversion or transformation. Right? Regardless of what is the structure in the other world, the conversation or conversion or transformation just happens. And then you have the query language also, which will be picked up based on the type of the database, whether it is SQL or something else, decided by the ORM. Right? Now, if I ask you what are the benefits of using an ORM, can you tell me? Database interactions from the application becomes pretty much simplified, where developers can focus more on the application's business logic rather than thinking about and implementing the complex SQL queries and other statements. Correct? That's first benefit. Second is I can develop my application regardless of which database I'm going to connect my application to. So in simple words, I can say it assists me with database portability, right? Because ORM actually provides the abstraction on the top of underlying database. With minimum code changes, I can just port my application to work with any database. Yes? That minimum code change might be also restricted to just some configuration changes, not even the code actually. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Next, better code reusability. Because there will be consistent interfaces being provided for all database interactions, whether it is insert, update, delete, or select operation. There will be a consistent approach, consistent interface, right? And as you don't write the queries on your own, the next benefit that comes up over here is there will be less chances of SQL injection attacks. I hope everyone knows what is SQL injection. While using queries, many a times in the older days, people used to write concatenated queries. And within that, some smart people used to, instead of providing the actual data input, they used to provide some query statements to short circuit the existing query and probably attaching some statements like some malicious queries, maybe deleting data, maybe modifying data for their benefits, right? Maybe deleting the database itself, correct? So as you don't write the queries, you don't use the query concatenation or string concatenation at all, and that reduces the SQL injection attacks. I'll not say it 100% avoids, but near to 100% protection is there. And then because it simplifies everything and allows you to focus more on the actual business requirements, it actually increases the productivity as well. You don't need to write the same repetitive, redundant code, correct?
Yes.
Now, if I say what are the popular ORM frameworks, can you name few? Effects for framework I'm placing. It all started with Java introducing Hibernate framework. Hibernate
Paper.
is available for .NET also by a name called as nhibernate. Then
Paper.
can you spell it out? DAPPER,
DAPPER.
right?
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a
Which language
micro.
it talks? It has been built for.
I think I have used for .NET. I'm not sure it's available for
Yeah,
other,
so it's
but
basically a configurable framework available for most of the popular languages and
mhm.
platforms, right?
Yep.
Third,
Entity framework.
entity framework. So I can say EF, which is specific to .NET. Hibernate is specific to Java. And its version, which is specific, is nhibernate, right?
Oh, okay.
Dapper is cross-platform and cross-technology. EF is again .NET only. Then any other name? There is one very popular framework, ORM framework
Type
for Python.
type ORM one is there. It's
Which one you said?
type ORM for the Node.js.
Correct. Which has been now replaced with another one called as Sequelize, actually. Further enhanced.
Okay.
So the Sequelize is more popular for Node.js now. Then there is one by the name Active Record, which is basically for Ruby on Rails. This is just a initial list. There are many ORM frameworks available across technologies and across platforms, out of which some are technology specific, some are cross technology implementations. We just saw the example here itself. Dapper is a cross technology, cross platform, whereas most of the other are very technology specific. Maybe for better optimization, they have been built specifically for technologies, right? So EF basically, if gets available for Java in coming days, it will be a different framework than what EF we see on .NET for better optimization. Even the cross-platform frameworks are like that only. Dapper, though if we say it's cross-platform, it is actually not. Dapper for .NET is different. Dapper for Java is different. Dapper for JavaScript is different. I mean Node.js. Understand? Their implementations are different. Clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, our focus is going to be on one of the framework from this list, that is EF. EF also is available in two formats. One is EF and one is EF Core, where EF is for regular .NET and EF Core is specifically for .NET Core. Right? So technically we'll be focusing more on EF Core. Is it clear?
Yes.
So how many of you have worked with Entity Framework Core in the past? I hope everyone has got some idea. Basic hands-on you might have done on it. Right?
Yes.
So what
Yes.
EF Core actually does, anything that ORM is supposed to do is applicable to it by default. It is something which talks to database provider at the very low level for finding out which database needs to be communicated. Database provider sometimes also is termed as database driver, right? So whether it is SQL provider, Oracle provider, or some other provider, which is responsible for letting EF Core know ultimately what type of queries are understood by the underlying database system, and which then actually results in hiding that detail from you as a developer. You use Entity Framework the same way across any database, but behind scenes, database will understand their own language. Yes or no?
Yes.
Correct. Now, EF basically works on some basic requirements, like we need to have some entities called as POCO entities. What is POCO? An acronym for plain old CLR object, means simple .NET classes, which have only the private data members with their public property accessors and some constructor. No functionality is expected into it. I mean methods. There could be some helper methods though, private methods, which might be doing some work for your properties and for the constructor. But practically any business logic or database logic code should not be present into these. Then those classes will be termed as POCO entities. Right? What next? They do provide self-tracking entities. What is self-tracking entity? That keeps track of any changes happening to itself, so that the change notification can be provided to any subscriber which might be present. Right? Then one feature from ORM also I'll list over here, transparent access to database. Means it need not be aware of, I mean, my code, my application need not be aware of which database is being used. Your EF just needs to have configured provider for it, database provider for it, and based on which it adjusts its queries. Right? So these are all in addition to what the standard requirements of your ORM are. Understand? Then some of the objects that it heavily uses. Let me list them down. Objects or not only objects, I'll say features also used by EF, applicable for EF core as well. So the first thing is POCO, plain old CLR objects, which are also called as entities. In MVC, which also can be called as models, right? Then we have something called as DB context, which is the most important thing. The entire feature set of an ORM is actually provided by this DB context object. This is the backbone of EF, right? All database operations are carried out by this. Query generations to their executions, everything. Then we have another important object over here called as DB set, which actually represents itself as a property of DB context that stores data in memory, just like data sets which we used to have earlier in disconnected architecture of ADO.NET, and allows you the different methods to be used for insert, update, delete, select operations without actually writing the queries. So this is where the mapping actually exists. Next, we do have support for language integrated query also. That allows your queries to be created with your .NET languages like C# or VB, right? Regardless of which database is being used behind scenes. Strongly typed queries you generate, which are compiled by your language compiler, not by the SQL compiler or something. Then, specifically for EF core, there is one more concept which is very important, a feature called as database migrations. What this migrations actually is responsible for? It actually helps you to manage the changes to your database schema over the time. Migrations allow you to evolve your database schema as your application itself evolves without losing the data or without having the need to recreate the database. Okay, so you change your entities and run the migrations. The changes are automatically detected and the DDL statements are automatically generated when you use migrations, and your database schema is automatically updated. Got my point? And then the next thing that is pretty important here is from here. Self-tracking entities. This is provided by a feature called as change tracking. So it behind the scenes uses observer pattern basically. Right? It automatically keeps track of the changes being made to entities. Whenever you modify the entity's property, the entity framework knows that it needs to be updated in the database as well. Whenever you call the appropriate save method on DB context. One more feature that comes in is lazy loading. This is precisely important when you are working with two related entities. Department and employee classes are there where department can have 100 employees into it. I mean, many employees into it. When I read the department data, it's not mandatory that I load the associated employee data all the time. In some cases only, the employee data might be requested where someone is interested in knowing which all employees work in this department. So whenever the need is placed, at that time, the related employee data should be loaded. So this delayed execution of the query results in lazy loading behavior. That helps optimize the memory usage, right? If we go for eager loading is another thing which comes along with this. Eager loading means early loading. So what that means? Load all the related data along with the master data. So we have a choice whether we go for lazy loading or eager loading. If you don't give the choice, by default, it goes for lazy loading, which is good with respect to the optimization in terms of memory usage, right? And then comes the memory mapping configuration. Okay. Okay. So these are all the features or objects that are used by entity framework or entity framework core. Now the next question could be where actually I should be thinking of EF.
Saket,
Yeah.
sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, go ahead.
You are saying mapping configuration, it's like automapper and all, you're saying?
No, automapper is a different thing altogether.
Means this is
Automapper might be needed when you have the entity framework entities that needs to be mapped to the MVC models. So you have two data structure objects only, which have similar structure in terms of the data and the data from one object to be copied to another object. Here, the mapping config is about the .NET objects being mapped to the database objects like tables, columns,
Okay.
rows. Understand?
Yeah. And once I just want to know, means are we
Yeah.
covering that one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many kind of relations in this sessions or?
Not actually, but see, here we need not worry as well because it is the entity framework which automatically keeps track of what needs to be done for those relations. It all depends on how you have created your entity. How is your composition, right? So behind scenes, whatever is required, it automatically takes care of.
Oh.
And mostly in EF, it is taken care of with the help of some attributes, custom attributes, right? So it's pretty easy. So though we will not be covering that in detail over here, maybe I can share some documentation for the same, which you can just go through and understand because it's really, really very easy here. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the next question is like, where do I actually get benefited from this? Where entity framework is more suitable? So it's mainly beneficial for the projects where the developers want to focus more on the application's business logic rather than writing the redundant database interaction code. It abstracts many of the complexities of the database access, making it easier to develop, maintain, and maybe in case if it is required, refactor the database related components of an application. Understood?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see with implementation, how do we actually go ahead? So let's assume that we have a need where we need to have a database called as Quinnox DB, which is going to have a table called as departments, which has got the fields like department number, department name, and location. Where department number is going to be of integer type. The name, I would be looking for nvarchar 50 in size. Nvarchar is Unicode variable characters. Varchar is ASCII variable characters, right? And Unicode is important when you are looking for the localized languages support, right? These days, most of the applications are created in such a way that they are compatible with different languages. So for that, the Unicode character support is needed. And that's why it is recommended that instead of varchar, instead of char, you can use their Unicode counterparts, nchar, nvarchar, etc. Understood? I want this department number to be unique. So I want this to be behaving like a primary key. Understand? That's a simple database requirement. But as of now, let's say I don't know which type of database I'm going to use. I just want to focus mainly on my applications implementation. Later on, probably I'll decide which database I want to use. I'll configure the provider accordingly. Do you get it? I want a simulated or mock database to be used to start with so that I can build the application without having the database in place. And once I'm done and satisfied with the application and its implementation, I will then proceed to get my actual physical database created using SQL Server. You get it? So let's go ahead. This project only I'll use. Maybe this file I'll close. Startup.cs I'll keep open. I'll need that shortly. Here in models, I right click and say add a new class called as department, DEPT. Make sure you use the similar names so that there is no conflict. Here I need a couple of namespaces to be imported. System dot component model dot data annotations followed by system dot component model dot data annotations dot schema. First, I create my POCO class created. I just say I have a property prop tab. You get this data type is int. I want a property by the name department number, or maybe I want it to be more descriptive. So I say department number. Next property prop tab. Data type is string. I call this as department name. And then I have another property named as location. Probably I get this class also renamed. So just go to Solution Explorer, right click department.cs file and say rename. Rename this to proper spelling department. And click on yes so that your class also gets renamed. If it doesn't get renamed on its own, just rename it manually. I want department number to be acting as a unique value in the record. I mean the object representing department. So I put the attribute called as key. This is where the mapping starts shortly. I want this to be of type integer. It has been already defined in the data type itself. I can still go ahead and specify what is the type I want by using SQL DB type or DB type enumeration. Okay. I want to make it required as well, though the key attribute implies it on its own. So if that is the case, I actually need not put required. Okay. Then department name, I want this to be having minimum 3 characters up to a maximum of 50 characters. That's my business requirement. So here I go for string length attribute. Maximum length is 50, comma, minimum length is supposed to be 3 characters. That's a rule I'm creating here. And beside this, I want this to be mandatorily entered. So I put required attribute here. Location is optional, but I want it to be having maximum length of 50. And being optional, I cannot put minimum length there. So it can be 0 to 50. So I just say max length 50. So it will set up nvarchar 50 for location. Here it will be nvarchar 50 along with a rule which checks that minimum length should be 3. So there will be a check constraint created automatically when the database is created with migrations. Understood?
Yes.
Saket, one more query.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this model right now, we have attributed key as a for department number, right? So it's a primary
Yes.
key.
Yes.
So if we keep the means I just read somewhere actually, if we have the name of the that member as a department ID, then there will be no need to give the key as attribute. Framework consider it as a
Yeah, so not department ID, it should have the name as ID. In that case, even if you don't give the key attribute, it automatically understands that, okay, you might be looking for a primary key behavior. So that's correct.
okay.
So
Okay,
only
means
ID,
yeah.
in case only
Yeah.
ID is used, regardless of which case you are giving in. If ID are the words, then it will consider it as a key.
Means is it only ID, not a department ID?
Yes, correct.
Okay, got
So
it.
any other variation would require me to put key attribute on the top of it. There is one more interesting thing about it. If you have an integer property within your Coco class, only one integer property is there. So by default, it is taken as primary key, regardless of its name.
Oh.
So even if you don't have a property with the name ID or department ID or anything matching with it, but you have an integer property, and that is the only integer property, it will automatically be taken as key if you have not provided key attribute on any of the fields. Understood?
Yes.
Plus, it has to be automatically configured as auto number, means identity column property automatically gets set on department number. So in case if I don't want auto number or identity behavior, I need to do something here. Database generated attribute I use with the enum database generated option dot none being set. There are 3 values: none, identity, and computed. So identity is default for any integer. None means no default generation, and compute means if that property need not be stored, it is a calculated field. So the value need not be stored in the database. There will be no column created. It will be a virtual column. Understand?
Means there will be one more attribute, right? Ignore as well. So it will not create the column in the table, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So if you want some property which should be there in the object but not in the database, then you can put the attribute called as ignore. So the property will exist in the application but not in the database. Okay. So this is my POCO class created. I want this to be mapped to a table named as DEPTS. So here I put an attribute called as table. And here I give the name of the table that should be used, department. So by default, the mapping is going to be taken care of by these attributes. Similarly, here for department number in the database, the column I don't want with the name department number. I want DPTNO. So I use the attribute called as column, where I give the name to the column as department number. If I don't give these names, then table attribute, column attribute, if it is missing, then whatever is the name of the class, whatever the name of the property is, these will be used as it is to define your table and columns. Understood? Like if I leave department name as it is, no column attribute is used, there will be a column created by the name department name. I don't want that. So what I'm looking for is column with the name D name to be created in the database. Understand? Location, I don't do anything with column attribute because I'm okay with this name being used in the database. Location. If I want it to be created by the name LOC, I can once again put column. So purposefully, I'm not providing column attribute here so that we can understand the use of column attribute. Is it clear?
Yes.
Safe. Okay, next. Let's right click on models, add another class named as, let's say, app DB context. Any name can be used, but remember that you have a suffix DB context being used for it, because that's a convention in .NET. Usually the base class name is used as suffix for the derived class, right? DB, D capital, B small, context, C capital. Add. This is where now I first of all need entity framework to be integrated. So here I go and say, right click on dependencies, add project reference. Sorry, let's cancel this. Right click on dependencies, manage NuGet packages. Go to browse tab and search for entity framework core. So here we do get something called as Microsoft.entity framework core. Version selected should be the latest version in your .NET compatible list. So as you are using .NET platform 5, we can select 5.0.17, not 6 or 7 at all. That will be incompatible. So make sure you have selected the right version here. Shows that it is deprecated, but because the .NET Core 5 itself is not supported by Microsoft anymore. Let's say install. Okay. Accept. Installed. There is one more, that is Microsoft.entity framework core.design that we are going to need shortly. So let's get that also installed. Same version should be selected, 5.0.17. Whatever you selected there, install. And then Microsoft.entity framework core.tools. Same version. Okay, except, and then I want in-memory database to be used. So let's go for Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.InMemory. Same version. 5.0.17 install. So Microsoft.Entity Framework Core is common, which was the first framework. Then we use this name .design, followed by this name .tools, followed by this name .InMemory, which says use in-memory provider. You can see the providers are available for different other databases also. Like, apart from in-memory, we have SQLite, right? Then we have lightweight version of SQLite itself, SQLite Core. Then we have support for PostgreSQL. Then we have SQL Server also available. Here it is. I'll get this also installed so that later on we don't need to come back over here. I'll just get it ready, as later on we'll be using this. Let's get this installed as well. Okay, I accept. So depending on which database you are planning to use, you can just select the provider, right? Oracle provider doesn't get listed here directly. Oracle provider needs to be downloaded from Oracle website explicitly, and then that is configured. Got my point? It's not available on NuGet. Let's see the installed list. What all things we have installed in case if someone has missed out. First, we installed Entity Framework Core. Then we installed Entity Framework Core.design. Then we installed Entity Framework Core.tools. Then we installed in-memory, the provider, and then SQL Server, another provider. Is it clear?
Yes.
Let's close this. And then come back to your appdb context.cs file. Let's import some namespaces. Let's say I'm looking for Microsoft.Entity Framework Core namespace that provides me the base class DB context so that my app DB context can get inherited from it. I need to represent the collection of DB set type to represent data from different tables in my database. Right now, I'm looking for just one table, that is department. So I create just one property here of type DB set, which is a generic class. So I say DB set is a collection which should be of type department by the name departments. So all CRUD operations I'll carry out on this collection. This is just like list. In fact, DB set inherits from list only with additional features into it. Is it clear? Then here I say there is a constructor which says use the base class constructor change the base class constructor over here. I make this app.db context constructor accept a parameter of type DB context options. By the name options. And I pass on this options to my base class constructor that is chained here. That is your DB context class. Very simple. Understood? I can precisely say that these options should be for my current app DB context. So I can use the generic version of DB context options. And then as a type parameter, I can say it takes an app DB context. Not mandatory, but it's an advisable thing. So that the app DB context object will configure options for itself only, not other DB context classes. So we have better control. Okay. Reduces the side effect basically. So once this is done, move to startup.cs. Import the namespace for models. spnet core dot underscore demo MVC app dot models. And then scroll down to configure services. Just before this add controller with views option, I'll say get my app.db context class registered as a service, dependency service. So I say services dot add DB context of type app DB context. With options, I use lambda expression there to configure which provider I want to use. So here I say options dot use in memory database. This requires me to give some name to the in memory database. Let's say that name is Quinnox DB. And save. Make sure you have this entity framework core namespace also imported. Otherwise, these things will not work. If it is not added by default, just put that using statement manually. Here. Yes.
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 Let's build the application to see all good. There is no syntactical error. All implementations are correctly done. Build succeeded confirms the same. Then I go to my controllers folder in Solution Explorer. Right click, controllers folder, add controller. This is where I'm going to use a MVC feature called a scaffolding, which you might have already worked with in the past with .NET Framework. Correct? Many times. So here on the left hand side under MVC, the controller option is chosen. If not, choose that. Three options are there. MVC controller empty means only the controller class will be created with no sample action. MVC controller with read-write actions. So there will be actions created for all CRUD operations, but there will be no code into it. MVC controller with views using entity framework. Now, because we have entity framework being used behind scenes, practically we can go with this that actually gets my controller with actions created for all CRUD operations and their related views also. Later on, this same implementation can be refactored in a way where views and controllers don't talk to the entity framework directly. In between, you can introduce your business logic component also. Controller talks to business logic talks to the data access layer represented by entity framework, and then entity framework talks to the database. So this is where the refactoring will be needed. Understood? In our sample, we are treating controller and business component as one single entity. For simpler requirements and POC applications, this is good. But for complex business requirements, probably you need a separate business logic layer to be created, which sits between controller and entity framework. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's add. Asking few questions like which model class you want your controller to be based on. So here the list shows me all the classes available. Practically, I'm looking for department class from the models namespace. Where is the DB context class? This is easy selection because it automatically filters only those classes which are inherited from DB context. So by that way, it finds only app.db context here. I select this. Then the option for generate views. So it will automatically create views if I keep this selected. I want initial boilerplate to be generated on its own. Reference script libraries. So basically, wherever the data input is there, it will automatically add jQuery and jQuery validation for it. And then whether you want to follow the layout page or not, it's a good idea because we have a theme already set with the help of layout page. You leave this box empty in case you are looking for the common layout page. But for this particular section, if you have created a separate layout page, you can use this button and select which layout page you want to use. If left empty, it will use the common layout page from here, which has been already set in view start.cshtml. The global layout, right? Then it is asking for the name for the controller. In fact, by default suggesting departments controller, because we use department class here as the model. I'm good with that. I just say add. If all goes well, the scaffolding action should complete successfully and our controller should be automatically built along with the views. And there it is. Here comes the controller class. This implementation is pretty much similar to what you might have already seen in ASP.NET MVC framework based on .NET framework, not .NET Core. We have app.db context as private read-only member, which is getting resolved from here. So this is where it actually looks into what all services we have registered here. This is container having the input for which all services are registered. And when here we are asking for this object, it actually resolves from the container. Gets the new instance of DB context created and assigned to this. So there is no hard code dependency here. This is loosely coupled architecture, right? Then we have index that returns me the view based on the list of departments. So basically tabular view will be there. Then there is details method that takes ID. So from this list, if I click on detail link, there will be a link. It picks up the current ID associated with that particular record, means department number, checks if the ID is not passed, then it returns HTTP status code 404 not found. If ID is present, it actually finds the record, corresponding record, and again checks if it is null, means the ID might be incorrect. So return not found, but if all good, return the view based on the department model object found. So it shows the data in read-only format. Then there are two create methods. First create method just returns the form page, form view. The second create method gets invoked when the data is filled into the form and submit button is clicked. Got my point? So the post request comes here. Here, the department model object gets initialized with model binder component being used behind the scenes. We check if the model state is valid or not, means all the values correspond to the rules that we have set here or not, or any other validations that we have set or not. If any one of the rule is failing, is valid will be false. And then this will not be processed, only the view will be returned as it is with error. If it is valid, it says add that object to the context. And then we say save changes. So automatically it creates the insert query and executes. And then we redirect to action index, means back to the index view. Otherwise, stay on the same view. Same case for edit, but one additional stuff. When the form is loaded, the existing data should be displayed into the form already. That's what this logic is all about. And then the post operation, I mean modification done and I click submit. The modified department comes here, some initial checks. If data is valid, we call update method on context to get the department object updated, and save changes automatically creates the update statement, gets it executed. Now there are two cases possible. What if that record has been deleted by some other user? So that's what being handled by this if statement. The other case is, what if some other user has modified that record already? So that will be concurrency exception as well. So we just read through it. The handler for this, handling behavior for this could be just refresh that page. What we have done here is the same. After looking at the changed data by some other user, if we feel that my changes are no more relevant, I just cancel the update request. Else, I put my updated content once again and recreate the request by clicking submit button again. Then delete is a two-step operation. First, we just confirm if the user wants to really delete this or not. So that's the typical get request coming in first. And then when the submit button is clicked, means user has confirmed that this needs to be deleted. The ID comes in. Remove method is called on the collection to remove from the in-memory collection, and then save changes creates the delete query to actually remove it from the database and go back to the index view. Okay. Now to integrate this, I need to have a small change. Meanwhile, you can see the views folder automatically got all the views. Contents of which you can see, because if you have worked with .NET based MVC, this is not a new thing. Scaffolding was available there as well, right? And the Razor syntax is also pretty much the same. Just that now HTML5 features are also being used. Right, some attributes have been given. The tag helpers, attribute helpers are there from MVC 5 onwards. And this has been introduced in .NET framework based MVC also. Okay, so simplifying the syntaxes further. HTML helper class dependency has been reduced. So this is create, this is delete view, this is details, this is edit view, this is index view. And then I go back to layout.cshtml where all the menu items being created. So here is the one for privacy. I copy this list item and paste it below itself. And few changes I make here. ASP controller I want to use is departments. ASP action is index. And the title to be displayed in the menu is departments. Save and start. So I do have a menu item departments. I click on this. No department data as of now because the object doesn't exist. Say create new department number 10. If I put HR, validation automatically works for me. Client side validation with jQuery validation. I can replace jQuery with React, Angular, or other web frameworks as well. Now this is because of that string length. I say this is HRD, so 3 characters are there. Location, let's say I put as Pune. Create. Created. Create new. Department number, let's say 20. I name it as finance. Location is Pune. Create. Next, department number 30. I call this as R&D. Location is Mumbai. Create. Another department, let's say 40. Name is production. Location is Hyderabad. Create. And one last record I'll add for the department name sales. Location is Bengaluru. Create. Add it. I click on details for sales or maybe let's say finance. I do get the read only view. Back to list. ID is not getting displayed here because usually ID is for system usage, right? If you want, you can modify your views to show that as well. I want to edit this record. Instead of finance, I want it to be finance and legal. If I want, I can change location as well. Save, changed. I want to delete this record for sales. Delete. Here comes the confirmation. Delete. Deletes it. So I'm able to have fully working solution here. I restart the application after closing and I still do have it. But if I completely stop my server, on the bottom right corner of your system, in the system tray, you see there must be IAS Express instance running. If you right click on that, there will be your application name displayed. And as a submenu, there will be an option called as stop site. Select that and then run your application again. This time departments list will be empty. Reason? I killed the process and restarted. In memory means it was an in-memory database. It was not writing anything on database or hard disk or permanent storage. So once the process is killed, my database is also killed. And it just starts over again. So this looks to be good for development and testing purposes, isn't it?
Yes.
Because while development and testing, we put some dummy data which is of no use in production. We clean up the database and then provide it to the customers, right? That's an overhead.
Right.
Now with this, that overhead is also not there. Use in-memory database. Do all of your testing. And then once you think that, yes, this application is doing what I wanted, I can actually say that now let's configure a database. Now let's configure a database, physical database, which I want to be SQL Server. So let's say here I'm looking for server. for which I create the connection string section, like what we saw in the last session, connection strings. I give the key as local SQL colon server equals to. Within parentheses, I put local DB double backslash MS SQL local DB as the server name, semicolon, database equals to Quinnox DB. Trusted underscore connection equals true, as this local DB that we are using actually is SQL Express Edition installed along with Visual Studio, and it supports only trusted connections, Windows integrated security. Then I have multiple active result sets equals to true. This is important because entity framework runs multiple queries on the same open connection at the different times, or maybe same time also parallelly. So if this is not set, by default, it is assumed to be false, and that allows only one query to be running on one open connection at a time. Either you close the connection after running each query, or if you want to keep the connection open, probably you need to close the other result set. Before closing the other result set, the other query will not work. And because of relational data, probably we may want multiple queries to be running on the same open connection when one query is still active. So this is good. Once configured, let's head back to startup.cs. Any idea what changes need to be made and where? First change is pretty obvious. I cannot go ahead with this statement now. I cannot have in-memory database now. I have to get this replaced with SQL Server. Am I right or not?
Yes.
Also, I need to tell, apart from using SQL Server provider, which SQL Server instance needs to be communicated. The connection string already we configured with the name local SQL, but application need to be informed that please use this connection string with this key. Correct? That's all we need to do here.
Yes.
I just say services dot add DB context. App DB context goes in as the type parameter. Options. I'll put the next configuration on next line. Options dot use SQL Server this time rather than in memory. Likewise, I can go for PostgreSQL or any other provider, right? Use SQL Server, but that's not enough. I need to tell which SQL Server. So if you see, it must be asking for a connection string as a string. Yes or no? Yes or no? So where is the connection string and app settings JSON? I want to read that. So in the last session, we saw how iConfiguration instance can help us in that. We already have a property which contains the value, right? So here I can take help from this configuration property, and I can call get connection string method. And there I just need to pass the key name, which is local SQL. And that's it. Save, start. What do you think? Will it work? I don't think so. And here is the confirmation. It says cannot open database. Reason? Reason? Actually, the database is not present, right? It's not yet created. One way is I go and manually create it, but then what's the use of entity framework? Entity framework comes with migrations, right? Which allows my application to be in sync with the database schema, correct? So here I go for migrations. For that, I go to tools, NuGet package manager console option, which opens a PowerShell console within Visual Studio. Let's issue CLS command to clear the screen. Here we say add dash migration, because this is the first migration. I usually use the names with the sequence numbers just to have our own manual tracking. I mean, to understand which migration was applied in which sequence. So I say 1 underscore. This is the first time we are running it. So I name this as initial create. Enter. It builds the application, scans all the implementation, and generates the migration. So the result is here. Now you will see there is a folder called as migrations, wherein there is a class 1 underscore initial created for you. And that contains two methods, up and down. Up contains create table method, which actually is the C# equivalent of table creation, and down contains drop table, which is C# equivalent of dropping the table, right? So it will actually generate this kind of script for each entity what you have created into your models, and which is not yet considered and updated into database. Got my point? Let's close this and go back to package manager console, and there. Here at this moment, only script is created, not yet executed. Database still doesn't exist. Only script is created. I need to run that script. For that, I issue the command update database. Update hyphen database, press enter. It just runs the script and my database must have been created, which I can actually go to Server Explorer and see. Server Explorer, let's right click on data connections, add connection. SQL Server is what I want to use. I don't want this selection to be used all the time. So I uncheck this box, continue. Server name it is asking for, so it is parenthesis local DB single backslash MS SQL local DB. Windows authentication. First I say test connection. Say succeeded means server is up and running. Here I go and click this drop down. I should be able to see Quinnox DB here. Select this, test connection again. So even this time it says succeeded means database is also created and connected. Say OK. The entry comes here for Quinnox DB. I expand this, I expand tables, and I do see a table by the name departments is created, DPDS. Further expanded, I have the columns where see the names. What we have defined with column attribute has been taken. And department number has become a primary key as well. If I want to see the data types and all, just right click on any of the field and say properties. So department number is int. Identity is false because of database generated option being set to none. Dname properties. Envarchar size 50. Then location. Envarchar size 50 again. So automatically it did all the things required. And my database now is in place. I just say start. Departments. This time there is no issue. It's quite fast as well. I say create new. Department number 10, HRD, Pune. Create. Created. Now this time it is going to be permanent. I close the application and restart it. Departments should show me the data. Close. I'll kill the IS Express process the way how I explained earlier. In the bottom right corner in the system tray, you should have an entry for IS Express. Right click on that, select your application name and select stop site. So your IS Express is killed. I start my application again. At this time, when we went to departments tab, the data was not available earlier within memory database. Let's see what happens now. It's available because now it's created in a permanent database on the disk. Is it clear?
Yes.
If you are using the CLI commands, .NET Core CLI commands, the add migration and update database will not work on CLI. There are two different commands which we'll be using. I'm just putting that into your chat box for your reference. If you use VS Code instead of Visual Studio, the lightweight version, right? Just check your chat box. .NET EF, migrations, add, and then the name of the migration, whatever you want. And then .NET EF database update. These are the CLI counterparts of add migration and update database. Migration and update database are PowerShell commands, whereas these two are CLI commands. Is that clear? They do the same thing as add migration and update database only, but on CLI. Is it clear?
Yes.
You can try out other operations also, like add few more records and edit details, delete everything. Okay. So that is
Yes.
it for today. In next session on Monday, we'll be starting up with ASP.NET Core Web APIs. Okay, so next 2 to 3 sessions will be on APIs, and then we'll go back to unit testing as we decided. Okay.
Okay.
And
Saket,
just one more update, like on Monday, there will be a small MCQ based assessment carried out on the topics which we have covered till today. Okay.
Thank you, Saket. I just unmuted myself to uh, request you the same, that
Yeah,
please take
yeah.
some assessment.
Yeah. So now actually the sizable amount of topics have been covered. So I also think that this is the right time for assessment.
True. Hope
Yeah.
everyone is ready for the assessment. If not, guys, if you have any query, please clear it beforehand.
One question. So
Yeah.
Monday will be assessment or the session or both?
Both.
Okay.
So first few minutes, let's say half an hour, we will be having the assessment. It will be an online one only, so the evaluation will happen automatically. And once you are done with the assessment, we will be starting with the session. Okay.
Okay, no issues.
Ankita,
Saket?
just one input
Yes.
for you. Like the topics as per the agenda, we shuffled a bit to make
Okay.
it a proper flow and chronology. Okay.
All
The
right,
thing
sure.
is, we have not cut down on anything. We just reshuffled.
Okay, no issues.
Yeah.
No issues. Saket, one more favor I want from you. Could you please
Yeah.
share the scores post the assessment of each
Sure,
and
sure.
every?
Preeti from my team will do that.
Okay, definitely. That would help.
Right. It will be online one only, so she will get the Excel report automatically. And once the report is generated, she will share that with you.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Saket.
Thank you.
Good
So
day,
bye bye,
everyone.
guys. See you on Monday.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.